Helpless and utterly dependent on its survival. During this time, it can hardly do anything for itself alone, except for one thing: it can learn language. The acquisition language is arguably the most essential and wonderful field we accomplish in our entire life, and we do it at an age we can hardly do anything else. However, it is the one thing that children do better than adults. Any physical normal child will learn perfectly the language learning, whereas how do young adults can perform the same feat? How do children do this? How do they acquire the first language? Until not so many years ago, many people were inclined to try to explain language acquisition in terms of imitation and reinforcement. In this view, the child simply tries to imitate what the group are saying. If he produces a good imitation, it perhaps gets rewarded with praise and smiles. If he produces a poor imitation, it gets discouraged by frowns or corrections. Consequently, the imitation of adult speech becomes steadily better, until they finally know different from it, and child has learned the language. One of the most profound achievements of the language study in recent years has been the demonstration that the imitation and reinforcement model is totally and absolutely wrong. Not only do children know language in this way, they couldn't possibly learn it such a way. It would be literally impossible. We now know a good deal about the children actual dual language, and turn out as far facilities of simple model imitation hypothesis which suggest. For years afterwards, the child remained largely helpless and utterly dependent on its parents for survival. During this time, it can hardly do anything for us all, except for one thing: it can learn language. The acquisition of language is arguably the most astonishing and wonderful feat we accomplish in our entire life. We do it at an age when we are hardly anything else. Moreover, it is one thing that children do better than adults. Any physical normal child will learn perfectly the language learning, whereas hardly any adults can perform. How do children do this? How do they acquire the first language? Until not so many years ago, many people are inclined to try to explain language acquisition in life. In this view, the child imitate what the girl was saying. Imitation is perhaps get real praise and a smile. If it produces a poor imitation, it gets discouraged by frowns or corrections. Consequently, the imitation of adult speech becomes still better, until they finally know different from it, and the child has learned the language. One of the most profound achievements of language study in recent years have been the demonstration of the imitation and reinforcement model. It's totally and hopelessly wrong. Not only do children not learn language in this way, they couldn't possibly learn it in such a way. It would be literally impossible. We know a good deal about how children actually do learn language, and it turns out to be far more personally it suggests. Yeah. For years afterwards, the child remained largely helpless and utterly dependent on its parents for survival. During this time, it can hardly do anything for itself alone, except for one thing: it can learn language. The acquisition of language is arguably the most astonishing and wonderful feat we accomplish in our entire life, and we do it. For years afterwards, the child remained largely helpless and utterly dependent on its parents for survival. During this time, it can hardly do anything for itself at all, except for one thing: it can learn, it can learn language. The acquisition of language is arguably the most astonishing and wonderful feat we accomplish in our entire life, and we do it at our age, anything else. The acquisition of language is arguably the most astonishing and wonderful feat we oh. The acquisition of language is arguably the most astonishing and wonderful feat we we will って聞こえるけど we accomplish in our entire life. The acquisition of language algorithm must associate we we accomplish in our entire life. We accomplish in 继续 except for one thing. It can learn. And accomplishing in our entire life. 继续 Except for one thing. It can learn language. The acquisition of language is usually the most essential and wonderful feat we accomplish in our entire life. And we do it high. Uh, we do high. Astonishing even feat in accomplishing entire life. 继续 Uh, and we do it at an age. And we do it at an age. At an age. And we do it at an age. When we can do anything else. Moreover, it is one thing that children do better than adults. A physical normal child will learn perfectly the language around it, whereas hardly any adults can perform with the ちゃんと a physical normal child will learn language around it, whereas hardly any adults can perform the same feat. How do children do this? How do they acquire their first language? Until not so many years ago, many people were inclined to try to explain language acquisition in terms of imitation and reinforcement. In this view, the child simply tried to imitate what the grown-up were saying. Inclined to try to explain language acquisition in terms of imitation and reinforcement. In this view, the child simply tried to imitate what the grown-up were saying. If it, pro- if it produces in terms of imitation and reinforcement, in this view, the child simply tries to imitate what the grown-up are saying. If it produces a good imitation, it perhaps gets rewarded with praise and smiles. If it produces a poor imitation, it gets discouraged from or corrections. Consequently, the imitation of adult speech becomes still better, until they finally no different from it, and the child has learned language. One of the most profound achievements of language study in recent years has been demonstration that this imitation and reinforcement model is totally and absolutely wrong. Not only not learning in this way, it couldn't possibly learn in such a way. It would be literally possible. We now know a good deal about the new language, and the term as students is far more fascinating than simple. Technical imitation is the discard of frowns or fractions. Consequently, the imitation of other speech becomes so better, until they are finally no different from it, and the child has learned the language. One of the most profound achievements of language studies in recent years has been the demonstration that imitation and reinforcement model totally and absolutely wrong. Not only do children not learn language in this way, they cannot possibly learn it in such a way. It would be literally impossible. We now know that imitation reinforcement model is totally and hopelessly wrong. Not only do children not learn language in this way, they couldn't possibly learn it in such a way. It would be literally impossible. We now know a good deal about the actual do language, and it turns out that more fascinating than simple imitation hypothesis would suggest. Translation the imitation reinforcement model is totally absolutely wrong. Not only language. One of the most profound achievements in recent years, imitation reinforcement model is totally hopelessly wrong. Not only do children learn the language this way, but the nano good to level the children actually do learn the China. It turns out, it turns out, it turns out, it turns out, turns out, turns out. Such a way, either impossible. Another good deal about the children actually do learn language, and it turns out that the way they, the way they, the way they do it, the way, the way, the way they do it, the way they do it, the way they do it. It turns out that the way they do it, it turns out that the way they do it, it turns out that the way they do it. 何を言うとんねん。Impossible. Even now, should actually do it on this. It turns out it's far more fascinating. The simple-minded imitation hypothesis would suggest could but the turns out turns out turns out that the way they do it. Language in this way, they couldn't possibly learn in such a way. We were infinitely impossible. Another good thing about how children actually do language. It turns out that the fashion, the simple-minded imitation hypothesis would suggest. For years afterwards, the child remained largely helpless and utterly dependent on its parents for survival. During this time, it can hardly do anything for it at all, except for one thing: it can learn language. The acquisition of language is arguably the most astonishing and wonderful feat we accomplish. The acquisition of language is arguably the most astonishing and wonderful feat we accomplish in our life. And we do it enrage hardly do anything else. Moreover, after language learning, there is hardly any adults can perform the same feat. How do children do this? How do they acquire their first language? Until not so many years ago, many people are inclined to try to explain language acquisition in terms of intentional reinforcement. In this view, the child simply tries to imitate what the grown-up are saying. If it is a good imitation, it gets rewarded with a pleasant smile. If it produces a poor imitation, it gets discouraged or frowns or questions. Consequently, the imitation of adult speech becomes still better, until they finally no different from it, when the child has learned the language. One of the most profound achievements of language study in recent years has been the demonstration that this imitation and reinforcement model is totally and helplessly wrong. Not only do children not learn language in this way, they couldn't possibly learn it in such a way. It would be literally possible. We now know a good deal about how children actually do learn language, and it turns out that the way that the fascinating. いや、聞こえな。 For years after birth, the child remains largely helpless and largely dependent on its parent for survival. During this time, it cannot hardly do anything for itself at all, except for one thing: it can learn language. The acquisition of language is arguably the most essential of unfulfilled real capture in entire life, and with it an age we can hardly do anything else. Moreover, it is the one thing that children do better than adults. Any physically normal child will learn perfectly the language around it, whereas hardly any adults can perform the same feat. How do children do this? How do they acquire their first language? Until not so many years ago, many people were inclined to try to explain language acquisition in terms of imitation and reinforcement. In this view, the child simply tries to imitate what the grown-ups are saying. If it releases a good imitation, it perhaps gets wowed with praise and a smile. If it produces poor imitation, it gets discouraged by frowns or corrections. Consequently, the imitation of other speech became steadily better, until finally no different from it, a child has learned the language. One of the most profound achievements of language study in recent years has been demonstrated that this imitation of the reinforcement model is totally and absolutely wrong. Not only do children know language in this way, it couldn't possibly learn in such a way. It would be literally impossible. We now know a good deal about the children actually do learn language, and turns out that the way they do it. 最後の2行が聞こえん。ああ、ああ。The parent was Bible. And their life. As we do it in our age, we can hardly do anything else. Moreover, it is the one thing that children do better than adults. Any physically normal child will learn perfectly the language around it, whereas, whereas hardly yes. In this view, the child simply tries to imitate what the grown-ups are saying. If it produces a good imitation, it perhaps gets great with a pleasant smile. If it produces a poor imitation, it gets discouraged by frowns or corrections. Consequently, the imitation of other speech becomes steadily better, until finally no different from it, and the child has learned the language. The further achievement of language studies in recent years have been demonstrated that imitation and reinforcement happens wrong. Not only do children not learn language in this way, they couldn't possibly learn it in such a way. It would be literally impossible. We now know a good deal about that children actually do language. いや、ここもな、マジで何ってこう。はあ、it turns out, はあ、何言ってかわからん。Impossible. We now know a good deal about that children actually do language. And it turns out, the, the way they do it, the way they do it turns out the way they do it, it turns out the way they do it turns out the way they do it, it turns out the way they do it. ざっと言わなくていいかも。Literally impossible. We now know pretty about how children actually do learn language. Turns out, なんか、impossible. We now know pretty about the day the way they the way they do it turns out the way they do it turns out the way it turns out that the that the way they do that とか書くな。 turns out the way they do it でいいじゃん。ざっと入れるなよ、こんなもん。It turns out the way they do it. It turns out the way we do it. こんなもん書くな。Literally impossible. You know not a good deal about how children actually do language. The way they do it, far more fascinating, simple-minded imitation hypothesis would suggest. Uh, for years afterwards, the child remains largely helpless and utterly dependent on its parents for survival. During this time, it can hardly do anything for itself at all, except for one thing: it can learn language. The acquisition of language is arguably the most astonishing and wonderful feat in life, and we do it at an age when I cannot hardly do anything else. Moreover, it is one thing that children do better than adults. Any physically normal child will learn perfectly the language learning, whereas hardly any adults can perform the same feat. How do children do this? How do they acquire a first language? Until not so many years ago, many people are inclined to try to explain language acquisition in terms of imitation and reinforcement. In this view, the child simply tries to imitate what the grown-up is saying. It produces a good imitation. It perhaps gets a praise and smiles. If it produces a poor imitation, it gets discouraged by frowns or corrections. Consequently, the imitation of adult speech becomes still better, until they are finally no different from it, a childhood language. One of the from the achievement, the demonstrations of the imitation and the reinforcement model totally work. Not only do children not learn language in this way, they couldn't possibly learn it in such a way. It would be literally impossible. We now know a great deal about how children actually do learn language, and it turns out the way to do it simple-minded imitation hypothesis would suggest. For years afterwards, the child remained largely helpless and utterly dependent on its parents for survival. During this time, it can hardly do anything for itself at all, except for one thing: it can learn language. The acquisition of language is arguably the most astonishing and wonderful field of work accomplished in entire life. We do it and anything else. Moreover, it is one thing that children better than adults. A physically normal child will learn perfectly the language surrounding, whereas hardly any adults can perform the same feat. How do children do this? How do they acquire the first language? Until not so many years ago, many people were inclined to try to explain language acquisition in terms of imitation and reinforcement. In this view, the child simply tries to imitate what the grown-up are saying. It produces a good imitation. It prays and smiles. If it produces a poor imitation, it gets discouraged by frowns or corrections. Consequently, the imitation of other speech becomes steadily better, until they finally no different from it. A child has learned language. One of the most profound achievements of language studies in recent years has been the demonstration that this imitation and reinforcement model is totally a hopeless wrong. Not only children not learn language in this way, they can't possibly learn it in such a way. It would be literally impossible. We now know a good deal about how children actually do learn language, and it turns out that far more fascinating than simple-minded imitation.って感じだな。きちー。うん。Have you ever seen ghosts? Felt your presence? Has your phantom double ever followed you around? Ever leave your body for a few moments? These might not be supernatural experiences, but they don't necessarily mean you were crazy either. Like some people experience a phantom limb after an amputation. You could be experiencing the presence of a phantom of the entire body, according to Peter Bruegel, an expert in the field of the human nervous system. In an article he wrote, though this phantom could be the result of damage to the part of the brain that helps distinguish between the body and the space surrounding, they can also pop up in normal brains as a result of powerful emotion, such as intense fear, sadness, or extreme happiness. In case of brain damage, the threshold for immediate intervention is simply lower. Many healthy people have growth experiences and do not suffer from our brain damage self-trigger. No brains can easily be tricked about the source of an action and taste that they themselves have an agency over. He pointed to the example of dramatic writing, in which the practice includes other beings take control of their hand in order to write messages from beyond. If one on one hand does not seem to obey one's own brain, the brain must construct something else to be responsible for the action, he said. Other research bears this out. Amputees often describe not only the presence of phantom limb, but the presence of the body pain once associated with their lettering. Pain that should no longer exist since the limb, with its nerves, has been removed. However, singles has a presence. Has your phantom double ever found you around? Ever leave your body for a few moments? These might not be supernatural experiences, but they don't necessarily mean you're crazy either. As some people experience a phantom limb after amputation, you could be experiencing the presence of a phantom of the entire body, according to Peter Berger, an expert in the field of the human nervous system. In an article he wrote, though the phantom could be the result of damage to the part of the brain that helps distinguish between the body and the space surrounding, they can also pop up in normal brain as a result of powerful emotions such as intense fear, sadness, or extreme happiness. In cases of brain damage, the threshold for misinterpretation is simply lower. Many healthy people have gastric experiences and do not suffer from overt perturbation simply lowered. Many healthy people have gastric experiences and do not suffer from overt brain damage. Self-regard. Normal brains can easily be tricked about the source of an action at a distance that they themselves have the agency over. He pointed to the example of automatic writing, in which those who practice it claim other beings take control of their hand in order to write messages from beyond. If one's own hand does not seem to obey one's own brain, the brain must construct something else to be responsible for the action, he said. Other research bears this out. Amputees often describe not only the presence of a phantom limb, but the presence of the body pain once associated with the limb. Pain that should no longer exist since the limb, with its nerves, has been removed. One of the most important ways a caregiver must work for victims with a terminal illness is about life and death decisions that arise with the progression of the disease. As the disease progresses, the patient will have less ability to discuss reasons and express his wishes regarding the choices available when he is confronted with the last stage of the disease. How will he want to be treated? Does he want extraordinary measures, such as artificial breathing and to feeling? It is important for the family and the victim to think about these questions long before the victim is completely without any voice. These issues are difficult to discuss under any circumstances. Our difficulty with death is evident in our desire to control it. On the one hand, we have tried to wrestle with death by denying it as a dying patient is sustained in which artificial state of life through advanced medical technology. Many people have recognized, however, that this attempt to keep death at a distance have caused a lot of suffering for the family. Preventing living well with the patient while in the early stage of disease is one step toward addressing his objection to the use of auxiliary measures taken to sustain a living state artificially while he is dying. Hmm. One of the most important ways a caregiver must work for victims with a terminal illness is about life and death decisions that arise from the progression of disease. As the disease progresses, the patient will have less ability to discuss reasons and express his wishes regarding the choices available when he is confronting the last stages of the disease. How will he want to be treated? Does he want extraordinary measures such as artificial breathing and tube feeding? It is important for a family and the victim to think about these questions long before the victim is completely without any voice. These issues are difficult to discuss under any circumstances. Our discomfort with death is evident in our desire to control it. On the one hand, we have tried to wrestle with death by denying it as the dying patient is sustained in an artificial state of life through advanced medical technology. Many people have recognized, however, that this attempt to keep death at a distance have causing a lot of suffering for the families involved. Preparing a living will that the patient, while in the early stage of disease, is one step toward addressing his objection to the use of extraordinary measures taken to sustain a living state artificially while he is dying. While he is dying. Now the most time illness is about the life and death decision that arise during the progression of disease. As the disease progresses, the patient will have less ability to discuss, reason, and express his wishes regarding the choices available when he is confronting the last stages of disease. How will he want to be treated? Does he want extraordinary measures, such as artificial breathing and tube healing? It is important for family and the victim to think about situations long before the victim is completely without any voice. These issues are difficult to discuss under any circumstances. Our discomfort with death is evident in our desire to control it. On the one hand, we have tried to wrestle with death by drawing it as a dying patient sustained in actual state of life through advanced medical technology. Many people have recognized, however, that this attempt to keep death at a distance have been causing a lot of suffering for the family involved. Preparing a living will with the patient while he is in early stage of the disease is one step toward addressing his objection to the use of extraordinary measures taken to sustain a living state artificially while he is dying. One of the most important ways a caregiver must work for a victim with a terminal illness is our life and death decision. With life, uh, terminal illness is about life and death decision that arise with the progression of the disease. As the disease progresses, the patient will have less ability to discuss, reason, and express his wishes regarding the choices available when he is confronting the last stages of the disease. How is he treated? Does he want extreme measures, such as artificial breathing and tube feeding? It is important for a family and the victim to think about these questions long before the victim is completely without any voice. These issues are difficult to discuss under any circumstances. All this can fault with death, with evidence, is our desire to control it. On the one hand, we have tried to wrestle with death by delaying it as the patient is sustained in artificial state of life, the real ones of medical technology. Many people have recognized, however, that this attempt to keep death at a distance have been causing a lot of suffering for the family involved. Preparing living well with a patient while he is in early stages of disease is one step toward addressing his objection to the use of external measures taken to sustain living state artificially while he is dying. まあ、For years afterwards, the child remained largely helpless and utterly dependent on its parents for survival. During this time, it can hardly do anything for their own, except for one thing: it can learn language. The acquisition of language is arguably the most astonishing and wonderful feat we've conquered in our entire life. If we do it at age anything else. Moreover, there is one thing that children do better than adults. Any physical normal child will propagate the language learning, whereas hardly any adults can perform the same feat. How do children do this? How do they acquire the language? Until not so many years ago, many people were inclined to try to explain language acquisition in terms of intimidation and reinforcement. In this view, the child simply tried to imitate what the grown-up was saying. It produces a good imitation. It perhaps gets word with praise and smiles. If it produces a poor imitation, it gets scolded by frowns or corrections. Consequently, the imitation of adult speech becomes still better, until the father is no different from it, and the child has learned the language. One of the most profound achievements of language study in recent years has been a demonstration that the imitation and reinforcement model is totally and completely wrong. Now, only the children not language in this way, they couldn't possibly learn this in such a way. It would be literally impossible. We now know a good deal about how children actually do learn language, and it turns out it's far more fascinating. いや、これ家結構聞こえるようにならんで。We now know a good deal about how children actually do learn language, and it turns out that it's far more fascinating than simple-minded imitation hypothesis could suggest. Uh, we now know a good deal about how children actually do learn language, and it turns out that the way that it is. マジでわからん。なんだこいつ。もっと。Literally impossible. We now know a good deal about how children actually do learn language, and it turns out that the way thatいや、これはね、聞こえないわ。無理です。